cold ain't the weather. That's death approaching.
When I was 9, my parents bought a derelict farm deep in the woods of Sweden. This isn't the first time my parents have done this. My parents had just sold the first farm after they made the farm livable. I was sad to part with it, but looked forward to a whole new world of adventure and discoveries. Nothing spooky ever really happened on the first farm. I was never scared of the old house or the woods around it. I could be alone for hours in the woods, just playing and making dens for the picnics with my imaginary adventure team. Something changed though when we bought the second farm. The first couple of times we came to paint and build on the house, nothing happened. I was just exploring the different buildings and the woods around us. This farm had 4 buildings: the main house, the garage, a stable, and we never found out what the 4th building was. It was badly damaged after it burned down. I was really into horses and used all my time in the stable. We had owned the house for a year when something happened. I was in the stable playing with some hay when I suddenly felt like someone had their hands around my neck and squeezed. I couldn't breathe. I instantly ran out of the stable, and as soon as I saw my mum, I could breathe again. But I was coughing and wheezing and couldn't stop. I tried to explain what was happening, but my throat hurt so much that I kept coughing. My mum rushed me inside the house and got me some water. I was still coughing and gasping after 15 minutes, so my mum decided to drive me to the hospital while my dad stayed with my brothers. I eventually stopped coughing, of course, and nobody could really understand what happened. Just an FYI before the next part. Up until I was 14, I have never had any allergies and had my first asthma attack when I was 13. The episode was written off as an asthma attack. Looking back and now knowing what an actual asthma attack felt like, I call bullshit. After that whole thing, I stopped playing in the stable and opted for playing in the woods with my brothers. The next time something happened was when I was 11. I had woken up in the middle of the night to hear someone walking. I stood up from my bed and walked past my parents, who were sleeping in the same room. I went to the kitchen and saw a black figure standing in the middle of the kitchen. Had I not noticed I walked by my dad, I would have thought it was him. I was frozen, but something came over me and I turned around and walked straight back to bed. I couldn't sleep though. I felt prickly eyes staring at me the whole night. I told my parents the next day that I saw a man in the kitchen, but they told me I was probably dreaming. I probably was dreaming, but after seeing that figure, I always felt like I wasn't welcome and felt eyes on me at all times. One occurrence, though, left me terrified of the house, and I begged my parents to leave me with my grandparents whenever they went to the farm. One day I was on my computer, chatting with some online friends and playing a game. My parents wanted to go grocery shopping and asked if I wanted to come too. I declined, being really into my game, and they asked me if I was sure. I nodded and they left with my brothers. I immediately regretted not going as soon as the door slammed shut. A feeling of terror overcame me. I was scanning the whole room I was in, scared to find something I shouldn't have. The car had already pulled onto the dirt road and was out of sight by now. The sound of the car drifted away and I was left in terror and silence. The silence somehow grew louder and louder until it was deafening, and I felt a pop in my ears. I was shaking and my teeth were chattering. Then I heard a tap, and another, and another. The taps were in a predictable rhythm. I knew it would be at least 2 hours until my family came home, since the grocery store was miles away. I had to endure it, but something sent me running out of the house. In the doorway to the kitchen, I saw a figure stalking towards me. This time I knew it wasn't a dream. My lungs felt like they were being crushed, and I began getting a headache. I stared at the figure for a good 5 seconds. Then, in pure shock, I sprinted out of the back door and towards the dirt road. I was thankful I was still wearing my flip-flops after eating breakfast outside. I ran up the dirt road, aiming to get help from the neighbors who live a 20-minute walk away. I didn't expect to see our car come down the road. I walked to the side of the road and my parents hopped out and asked what happened. I burst out crying, so they put me in the car and I refused to go inside the house again. My parents thought I had made it all up and told me I was paranoid. I stand by what I saw. Years later, and I still hate that farm. I've visited once since, but never again. Whatever was on that farm hated me specifically. I just have one thing that is bothering me a lot. How long was I frozen in place? Like I said, it takes hours for us to go grocery shopping. It felt like what happened was in a span of 5 to 10 minutes. To be honest, I don't even want to know. I'm just happy I don't have to go back there ever again. So, I rent this house, but it has been in the family of my landlord, Nancy, since it was built in 1929. She lives 1.5 acres behind me in her own home, and she also owns the house next to mine on the corner. Her house was built on family land in the 1980s, and there is approximately 35 acres of bean farm that is also a part of this large plot I live on. So the home I live in is the original farmhouse for the Miller family here in northwestern Ohio. Now, we, my husband, our 2 kids, our dog and I, moved in here on the 1st of April of this year. It's a quaint little farmhouse with 2 bedrooms, original shiplap along the mudroom walk, and original millwork along the window casings and floorboards. The newest part of the house is the garage, which is completely made of cinder block and no frills. I absolutely love old homes with the original details, and we have been fixing it up a bit as Nancy is suffering from esophageal cancer, and I want to make sure she is looking after herself and not worrying about us or some peeling latex paint on the doors. Everything was normal about this place, aside from some well water issues that were quickly fixed with the installation of a water softener. But we really enjoyed being here. It's a quaint little house, just big enough for us, and I love living here. Until one morning while I was getting ready for school. I'm going back to school for a degree in physical therapy after not being able to find a job in my original major, early childhood education. I get up every morning at the same time, 0600, and this particular morning my husband, who is a police officer, had the day off, so he was going to let our kids sleep in with him instead of making me haul them off in the dark to the sitter's house. I was getting dressed in our living room, as not to wake my husband or my son, who likes to co-sleep, with the lights on in our room when I saw it. The door to my children's room was open. Someone was standing there staring at me, half hiding behind the doorframe. That someone was about a head taller than either of my children, with a full head of dirty blonde curls. In a second, it slowly pulled its head back and vanished. And now for reference, my daughter's bed is up against the wall, and the foot of her bed is right at the doorframe to accommodate both twin-sized beds and their dresses in the same room. So there is, in fact, no way anyone could stand at the end of her bed and hide behind the doorframe at the same time. I raced into the room, and not only was my daughter asleep at the top of her bed, but she was holding her giant cow stuffed toy, and they were both tucked in. I woke my husband up, and he saw that I was visibly shaken up. He said my pupils were huge and I was shaking. After explaining what I saw, he went in to check for himself, and when he came back, I wasn't in any better shape. He asked if he should treat me for shock, and I said no, but I know what I saw. This was about 2 months ago, and the reason I am sharing this now is because another incident happened tonight, to my husband. He was brushing my daughter's hair after her bath, and he said a black shadow crossed the threshold in my children's room, and he yelled for me. Goosebumps were all over his arms and legs, and my daughter was asking, "Who's in there, Dad?" She's 3 years old. Then, as we are putting them to bed, a little Tyke's toy circus goes off on top of their toy box several times. My husband calls to me from the bathroom to come and see what's happening, and it goes off one last time while I am approaching it. None of their toys have ever gone off by themselves since moving here, especially not this one. It's a tiny circus that only makes music when the little acrobat is on a tightrope and you lift one side to make him slide across. We plan on installing cameras to their room and the toy area to keep monitoring this situation this weekend, but the 1929 farmhouse seems to have come with a lot more than was listed in the rental agreement. For some background, as a child I had a reputation for being what some people would call sensitive. It wasn't something I really explored, it just happened sometimes. From describing a past life and having lots of imaginary friends, to knowing before anyone else that my nanny had passed. This is from when I was around 16. Anyway, to the story. Around 20 years ago, my mum's best friend, Jan, had moved into a small holding on the edge of Saddleworth Moor, near Manchester, UK. For those unfamiliar, this is where Ian Brady and Myra Hindley, aka the Moors murderers, disposed of their victims. The house was a converted barn with the remains of the former farmhouse visible in the upper field. No idea how old the place is, but safe to say it was old and needed some work. My mum, having studied interior design, was on hand to help. So my mum was spending a lot of time at the farm painting and things, and had started to experience movement in her peripheral vision when she was alone in the house. She mentioned this casually to Jan, who admitted that odd things had been going on since they started the work, and it was getting increasingly worse. For example, lights were being switched on after she'd gone to bed. She'd come down to every light in the downstairs of the house illuminated. Things weren't where she left them, even though her partner at the time worked away, so it was just her and the animals. The missing things would sometimes reappear days later in plain sight. Her dogs started to refuse to eat in the dining room where she kept their bowls, and wouldn't stay in the room unless she was there. The last straw was when both she and the animals were getting ill, to the point she got someone in to check for mold or some other pathogen. Hearing this, my mum suggested asking me to go up on the weekend to take a look. I had no idea about anything that had gone on at this point, and had only been to the farm once before. We arrived and Jan immediately asked me to look around and tell her if I noticed anything. The living room and conservatory were fine, but as I walked into the dining room, it was like the atmosphere changed. I started to get the impression of an older man who wasn't exactly friendly, but not evil either. This was the energy drain that was making them sick and upsetting the dogs. I asked if she knew whether there used to be another door where the store cupboard was, as I felt there should be another opening, but had no idea why. We went upstairs and that was a totally different story. The energy there was friendly, almost playful, and as I popped my head around the door of the spare room, I got an impression of a younger man, maybe early 30s, with a Freddie Mercury mustache and a warm smile. I told her he was there to protect her, and that it was him that had been moving things to get her attention. I also explored outside and in the stables and encountered 2 more spirits, a lady in an old nurse's uniform with a military connection, World War I possibly, in the stables, and a young girl of around 14 in the garden who I followed up a path to the ruins of the old farmhouse. She was in early 20th century working class dress and was probably related to the mills further down the hill. Jan was grateful for the insight, but there was nothing else I could do. She did find a photograph she wanted me to see. A young man with a Freddie Mercury mustache and cheeky smile. He was her partner's brother who had died in an accident in his early 30s. She decided to call someone in to cleanse the house, and without giving them any information about my insight, the professionals told her there was an open portal left by a previous occupant in the store cupboard, and the older man was using energy from the house to come and go. They sent him back and closed the portal for good. Jan didn't take them upstairs or outside as she wasn't concerned by the others, but she did tell me later that when she went back upstairs later, the Bible that she kept open to a passage meaningful to her had been moved and was now open at the Ascension, which was hopefully a message from her protector that all was well and he could move on. This happened to me about 10 years ago, but still sticks with me to this day. I was around 15 years old and my mum and dad decided we would take a trip to my aunt and uncle's new house they had just bought in Gridley, Illinois, and stay for a few days. We lived in central Indiana, so it was about a 3.5-hour drive to get there. The house was an old farmhouse, probably built in the early to mid-1900s, and sat very isolated, basically in the middle of a cornfield. I have a very large family, and a few of my mum's siblings travelled to the house as well, so they were going to have a big party. My uncle, who owns the house, has a son about a year or 2 younger than me. We will call him Steve. So my cousin Steve and I had been hanging out all night, playing video games, spending time with our families, etc. Everyone was up fairly late, and as people started going to bed and the party was dying down, Steve and I decided to go to his room and crash for the night. Steve has a pretty small bedroom, I would say about 10 foot by 10 foot, but he did have bunk beds, so there was plenty of room for both of us to sleep in there. He normally slept on the bottom bunk, so I climbed up top to lay down for the night. As I did, basically every night I would pull out my phone and check my MySpace or Facebook. So after laying there for about 5 minutes, Steve gets out of bed and said he needs to go use the restroom. The head of the bed is right next to the door, so I look down and watch him leave the room and shut the door behind him. His room was basically pitch black dark, but there was some light in the hallway, so I clearly saw him leave. So at this point, I'm laying on the top bunk in his room by myself in basically pitch black darkness, besides the light from my cell phone. He was gone for maybe a minute when all of a sudden, the bunk bed started slamming into the wall behind me, like there was someone at the foot of the bed rocking the bunk bed back into the wall. As it's slamming into the wall, my first thought was maybe one of Steve's older brothers is playing a prank or something. So I say, cut it out, that's not funny. The bed continues to slam into the wall. It did it probably 10 times total, probably once every second or two. I wait for it to stop and hop down off the top bunk to turn on the lights, expecting someone to be standing at the end of the bed laughing at me. I turn on the lights, and nothing. Nobody is in the room, just me. Like I said, it is a very small room, and I made sure to check everywhere. Under the bed, in the closet. I was the only person in the room. At this point, I am just completely terrified. and I'm trying to rationalize what just happened. I decide maybe the bed is just rickety, and I was rocking it somehow. I go to the foot of the bed and try to recreate what just happened to me. Not happening. This bed is one of those all-metal bunk beds, bolted together, and it isn't budging. The only way I could get the bed to move the way it did would be to slide the entire bed back into the wall and then slide it back. This thing was on carpet as well, so it was not moving. I tried with all my strength to mimic what I felt, and it just was not happening. At this point, I am just in total panic mode. I run out of the room down the hallway to the bathroom and ask my cousin what the hell he was doing, and he told me he had to poop. I asked him if he was just in the room fucking with me, and he asked what I was talking about. I explained what happened, and once he was out of the bathroom, we went back to his room and talked about it. He said him and his family have almost all experienced some kind of paranormal happening since they moved into the house. Safe to say that night, I did not sleep in his room. I went and slept on the floor next to the bed where my parents were sleeping. This is the only time in my life I have ever experienced anything paranormal. Hello watchers and listeners. It's me, Papa Scare. Well, October's here already. And to celebrate Halloween, if everything goes well the week leading up to Halloween, I plan on doing daily uploads. One of the videos I would like to do would be subscriber stories. I have a couple of subscriber stories already sent to me ready to be read, but I'd like a few more. So if you have any stories you'd like to share, now is your chance to send them in. Please send them in as soon as possible to my email, which is in the description below. If you could, I'd really appreciate it. As always, if you enjoyed that video, please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all the Reddit users who allowed me to use their stories. A link back to each story is in the description below. A huge thank you to everyone who continues to support me. I really do appreciate it. And remember,
Smile. Papa loves you.